Curtis Flannery with BC Interruption is our special guest. It's time for a Boston College football preview. This is ACC Nation, podcast, streaming radio, and YouTube. And I'm Jim Quist. That's Will Ogenet. Welcome, Curtis. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here. Excited to talk about BC football and the ACC. Really excited.
Lots of stuff to talk about, too. Hey, let's start with Jeff Hafley entering his third season. One of the worries with hiring Haffley that I heard a lot of was if he found solid success with Boston College, he'd get back on the college coaching carousel. So does that, let's call it fear, still linger that he'll move on if he has success at Boston College?
Yeah, that thought is always there, especially for BC fans. I mean, we're often seen as a stepping stone school, not only for coaches, but for lots of other positions. For example, our last two athletic directors, Martin Jarman used us as a stepping stone to get to UCLA, Pat Kraft to Penn State. So we're used to that sort of dynamic. But from our last coach in Steve Adazio, I think BC fans are sort of like the kind of coach that stays here a while might not be the kind of coach that we want to keep around. So you sort of have to shoot for the stars and go for a rising star like Jeff Hafley. And even if he does find a lot of success and eventually moves on, at least you found a lot of success with him. So I think we've sort of moved on from worrying about that too much.
That was a not too subtle burn on him.
You'll find that BC fans like to burn Adazio quite a lot.
Yeah. Trust me, we can fully appreciate it too. Let's get into the X's and O's, and we'll start, I guess, with offense. Will?
Yeah, before we do, I'd just like to say, yes, I know some BC people, and they definitely love to take their shots at Adazio, and I don't blame them either. But let me ask you this, because I'm curious about how the offense is going to run this year. This was a team last year that ran 60% of the time. And I don't know if that was just because, Jurkovec was hurt and missed a lot of the season. And even when he came back for those final four games, he wasn't fully himself. But this team was also pretty good defensively, especially against the pass. Now, considering Haffley obviously being a defensive-minded guy and the defense returning, quite a bit, do you still see him being more run focused with this offense this year?
I think a lot of it depends on how the offensive line ends up playing. They have a completely new unit there, and if they're performing better than expected, I think they could rely a lot on the run again. Pat Garwow's returning from an all second team ACC season, and he's really strong. And they have a lot of interesting running backs also in the backfield. So I think that's something they could utilize a lot. But I think Haffley talked about when he first got to BC is he wanted to run a spread offense and he wanted it to be high flying. So I think if you get a full season of Jurkovec with the real ability to pass the ball downfield, which he didn't have in the back half of last season, I think they will try to pass more. So all in all, it's sort of dependent on that offensive line, but I think they will go a little less run heavy this year.
And you mentioned it, 5 new starters back with the unfortunate injury to Christian Mahogany, and all the ACC offensive linemen, although he has put out some cryptic-ish tweets the last couple of days saying he may come back at some point this year. But this also coincides with the new offensive line coach who has drawn a lot of praise from fans and media alike. So what are the early reports on the offensive line in fall practice?
Yeah, well, in terms of Mahogany, the rumor is sort of that he's eyeing a sort of middle of fall, late October, early November return. That's completely unofficial. I wouldn't back that up with any named sources, but it is what the rumor is. And that would be a big get for them. Mahogany is by far the most experienced person they have on the offensive line. And he's really good. He was projected to be a top NFL draft pick if he played this season. So that would be a boon for them if they got him. In terms of the rest of the offensive line, they're still figuring it out. They have named pretty much who they think are the 5 key guys who are going to start on the line, but they have a few other guys they might rotate in and try stuff with. So far in camp, it's going all right. They are progressing. Coach Googe, who you mentioned is getting a lot of praise. He's taking some experience he has elsewhere, especially in the NFL, to coach up these guys. But it's going to be a learning process. A lot of these guys are really inexperienced, and it could go any number of ways.
Yeah, Pat Carwell came out of nowhere to have a pretty nice 1,000-yard season last year. Do you see him still getting the bulk of the work at running back this year?
Absolutely. I think he's their bona fide first and second down back. You have a couple other guys like Alex Sinkfield, Xavier Coleman, who they brought in last year, who could see some more pass catching third down work or second and long, the deal. But yeah, Pat Garwo should carry the bulk of the workload on running downs.
Obviously, Zay Flowers is one of the most dynamic players in the league who pretty much can take it to the house anytime he touches it. You get Jalen Gill back along with Jaden Williams. And then also one of the things that if you watch Boston College's on offense, they like to use the tight end a little bit. And obviously Trey Berry is gone. You picked up George Takis out of the portal from Notre Dame. So it looks like, he could be in for a nice season, but it looks like overall, this looks like a pretty solid receiver unit.
Yeah, absolutely. The offensive playmakers are, I think, by far the biggest strength of this offense. And they're deep too. Like you said, you got Zay Flowers at the top, but you've got a bunch of other guys, Jalen Gill, Jaden Williams, George Takacs, who they're bringing in. Takacs, I think, is going to be really instrumental. They rely a lot on those big tight ends and tall pass catchers. Trey Berry last year, Hunter Long the year before. They're really a focal point of that offense. And another guy who might go under the radar is incoming true freshman Joseph Griffin. He's a really tall wide receiver, 6'4", 200 pounds, and he can really go up and get those balls. And I think it'll be interesting to see if he eventually earns some playing time on the field this year also.
So let's talk about tactics a little bit here. What intrigues me is his size. This guy is a monster. What kind of yard after catch are we looking at with him from looking, he didn't play a lot or didn't get a lot of action at Notre Dame, but, transferring him into Boston College, I would think that this guy is going to get a lot of targets. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, there's not a lot of film to go off of based on his time at Notre Dame. He sort of got buried on the depth chart a little bit, but based on his recruiting profile and what we've seen in camp, he really does have some speed and quickness to him that you wouldn't expect from such a big guy. And I think he will be able to fill that role nicely, especially like we saw with the past tight ends in the BC offense. A lot of these short in routes that he can catch and really take off yards after the catch. So, yeah.
I'm sure he's probably beefed up maybe a little bit more, but the last stats that I had on him was 6'7", 245, something along those lines. He's a monster.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking at the depth chart now. He's listed at 247 right now. So yeah, he's a big guy.
Yeah, that's the kind of guy I'd be throwing to the ball all the time, right over the middle and just pick away. This pro style attack Will, and you were kind of alluding to this a little bit more. I want to get a little more into detail here because I keep getting the impression if everybody is healthy and specifically your quarterback, that it's going to be speeding up on offense quite a bit. I mean, what kind of impact are we looking at here?
Yeah, definitely. I think they're going to look a lot more to getting touches to Zay Flowers and Jalen Gill sort of in the short and intermediate range, especially behind the line of scrimmage, something they didn't do a lot of last season with their offensive scheme was get Zay Flowers touches behind the line of scrimmage, something that he really excels at in creating space for himself just horizontally across the field. They're thinking about utilizing him as a punt returner every now and then, but he's a little bit too valuable to do that super often. So they want to use that skill set to really speed up the offense, create this lot of moving parts along with the other receivers and do quick, short, intermediate passes, something that Phil Dracovic actually is pretty good at as well. It was tough to see it towards the back half of last season because he injured his hand, his grip strength, and throwing power just wasn't the same. But he really does excel at throwing the ball really tight, really fast, really hard at his receivers intermediately. And I think you could see a resurgence back in the offense for that.
Before we get into the defense, let's talk a little bit about special teams here, because you brought up returning punts and kickoffs and kicking game. Let's talk a little bit about that and who you think is going to be returning punts, kickoffs, who's kicking, and if the game is pretty solid there, because it seems to me year after year in the ACC, the kicking game is critical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. As far as returning kicks, they're bringing back Jalen Gill as a punt returner. He's been taking over those duties since he transferred from Ohio State. I think this is his third year. And he's really good at that. He's not super electric like Zay Flowers, but he certainly is good at returning kicks. And then for full kick returns, they're using Alex Sinkfield, who is a transfer from West Virginia, I believe. And he's got a lot of horizontal speed as well. So they have a couple of different guys they can rotate in there for returning kicks, really highly recruited, very physical guys that are able to do that. And then in terms of kicking, they're bringing back Connor Litton to kick field goals, who by far and away is the best kicker BC has had in a while. He made so many kicks last year, and something that's really been a struggle for BC, especially in the Steve Adazio era. I think back to the Pinstripe Bowl in 2014, where they missed the extra point to lose the bowl game in overtime. Just some excruciating kicking experiences there. And then they're bringing back Danny Longman, who was a punter before, and then they had Grant Carlson for a bit, and now Danny Longman is punting again. He's all right. They have an Australian punter as a true freshman on the depth chart as well that people thought he may start, but ended up being Longman again.
Since we keep bringing up Adazio here before we get into Will's look at defense, I've carried this badge of shame with the Chicago Bears, the double doink. I'm going to start referring to Adazio as the double doink from
there. Yeah, that's essentially what he is.
Will.
Oh, Jim. So this was a pretty strong defense. It was one of the better pass defenses in the league, but it did struggle a little bit against the run. I mean, I think that's fair to say, but as my dog is making his presence known. But let's get into this defensive line. It's a very veteran. Marcus Valdez led the team in sacks. He's back. And even though there's some little bit of attrition there, like I said, there's some 3 seniors that are on the depth chart to start, plus a junior. So it feels like this is still going to be a really strong defensive line.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the main thing about this defensive line is the fact that they're bringing back so many players, and also they're bringing back their nose tackle, Chibueze Onwuka, who got injured in the preseason last year, wasn't able to play any games in the 2021 season, but he's a real good run stuffer. He's going to be starting at nose tackle for BC. So a lot of veteran presence there in terms of the defensive line. The issue is that Haffley didn't really bring in many big name recruits or big name transfers to the line, and they did struggle with run defense and occasional pass rushing as well. So it's something that'll be a battle, but you got to hope a year of development will improve that front seven there.
The linebacker, you get Cam Arnold back. He led the team in tackles last season, but you did lose Isaiah Graham Mobley, which is kind of a tough loss, but he was really good. But even still, with all the things back, it still shouldn't be. His loss won't be as big, I don't think. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. Isaiah Graham Mobley, we call him IGM. He was a real team leader for BC last year, and he was very good, but they are bringing back Cam Arnold. They're bringing back Vinny DePalma, who were both leading tacklers for BC last year too, and Bryce Steele, who's an up-and-coming player who played a bit last year, looked pretty good, and they're going to be bringing him in for that IGM role. So, yeah, for that front seven, they are bringing back a lot of production despite the loss of IGM.
Now, secondary, obviously, you did lose Brandon Sebastian, which is a tough loss. He led the team with 4 interceptions, but I really like a lot of what the rest of the secondary can bring to the team. Obviously, Josh DeBerry is one of the leaders of the secondary. I'm curious because when I'm looking at this 2 deep, they have Jalen Chico as a redshirt freshman listed as a potential starter along with all these other seniors. How does the secondary look? It looks pretty veteran and pretty strong. Obviously, we talked about them being one of the best in the league last season.
Yeah, definitely. Hafley's specialty is secondary. He's been a secondary coach for a while at Ohio State. He was co-defensive coordinator, but he was secondary coach for them before then. So he really knows how to coach up a defensive backfield. And yeah, the really strong players are Josh DeBerry at the nickel, Jaden Woodby at strong safety. He was a transfer from FSU. He had his first year last year. and he's both are outstanding players. You could see them as NFL draft picks. And then, yeah, Jalen Cheek has really shot up during this camp. He's a redshirt freshman, didn't get very much playing time at all last year. But he's really come into his own. He's really big physical corner that can cover guys in the slot, and go up for those either or balls as well. So it'll be really interesting to see how those seniors and Jalen Cheek pan out, but I'm very confident in the abilities of the secondary.
Before we get into the schedule, let me just ask you this. I feel like Haffley, especially with the 22 class, and it feels like he's had a lot of traction with the 23 class, has really brought Boston College's recruiting up another level.
Yeah, absolutely. Their recruiting classes have been some of the best in BC history. The past few years, they've been able to bring in these players like Jalen Cheek and other guys, and it's not so much that they're hitting home runs on 4 or 5 star players, but they're getting a real multitude of quality 3-star players and a few 4 stars that really provide a lot of depth for especially the defense, but on offense too.
Something that we beat, or I beat to death sometimes, but I think it needs to be said, is that the teams that are on the northern and southern extremes of the conference tend to not get the sort of coverage within the center portion where a majority of schools are. So we don't get a good feel for what a team may or may not be doing. And there's something that I pull away from this team that tell me, your thoughts, whether I'm right or wrong here. I get a feeling that if things click just right, that this is going to be the under the radar team to watch. That they're going to sneak up on people, and we have this almost every year. I mean, every year in the ACC for the last couple of years, it's been the teams that were down in that lower tier all of a sudden became top tier. And I think sometimes we underestimate, and part of that is some media bias, which we all have, unfortunately. But that bubble tends to shield ACC fans from knowing exactly what teams like Boston College, a Syracuse, or a Pitt may have, or a Miami, or sometimes even Florida State, because they're not in that center portion. So tell me, Curtis, how do you feel about this team from the standpoint of maybe being one of those under the radar surprise teams in the conference?
I think that's absolutely right. You can just look at their production last year as an example. Dracovic went down in week 2, and they were still able to string together a really strong season, going 6-6, which was deceptively strong too, because their offense just wasn't able to score against Clemson with Grossell, but they were one fumbled snap away from beating Clemson. They were a frustrating game against Syracuse, just a couple possessions away from beating them, something that they should be able to do with Dracovic at the helm. That's 2 wins away from 8-4 last season. So with another year of development for this defense, and Zay Flowers coming back, Jalen Gill coming back, all this extra development, I think they really could surprise some people, and they've flown under the radar because they underperformed a little bit the past couple of years.
That's a dangerous team in my eyes. So I mean that's, and again, our perspective is we're not looking at, like you guys, when you at BC Interruption, you're focusing on Boston College, and everybody else is focusing on a specific team, but we're focusing on everybody as much as we can. So when we talk with people such as yourself, we're getting a feel for what teams may or may not be doing, and that's part of the reason why I say, hey, keep an eye on this team, because I think they're dangerous. Let's talk about the schedule, because to me, this schedule is sort of yo-yo. It's all over the place from the standpoint of potential. 1 week it's an up thing, and then it's a down, and it could be a win, it could be a loss. So we'll talk about this schedule, and it starts this weekend with Rutgers, and in some I guess some venues, people would go, well, this may be a close game, but I'm not so sure. Boston College feels like, again, like I said, it's a surprise team. I think this might be more of a win. But let's get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, definitely. People thinking it might be a close game. I don't think that's unjustified. A lot of it depends on the battle in the trenches and how that goes. Like we mentioned before, BC has a really inexperienced offensive line, and Rutgers, if they have talent anywhere, it's on their defensive line, really. So if that battle sort of gets out of control for BC and turnovers start happening, lots of sacks, then I could see an upset potential for Rutgers. But on paper, BC really is the overall much more talented team, and they really should be winning opening weekend.
Well, we get right into ACC competition on the 10th, and you go to Blacksburg to take on Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech is rebuilding, and there's some question there as to what they do or do not have, and it's going to be a challenge for Coach Pry to bring the Hokies back up to the level that we're accustomed to seeing them. But give us your thoughts on that game.
Yeah, rebuilding is definitely a good way to put it. They're, especially on offense, they're sort of all over the place. But it's a night game in Blacksburg. I never want to underestimate Virginia Tech in that situation. So, really, if it was on a neutral field or in Alumni Stadium, I would be fairly confident in the Boston College win. But because it's in that environment, I'd probably see it as a toss-up. But on paper, I think BC's the better team.
Get lost in Sandman. Will, I'll take this to the about the Open, and then I'll let you finish it up. Maine is the next team. There's really nothing to say there, so this is the yo-yo thing. The 24th at Florida State. Now, Florida State is a team that's coming back, and again, I think that's a team that you have to keep an eye on. So here we have two of these under the radar type of teams going up against each other. This could be a real battle down in Tallahassee.
Absolutely. Yeah. Florida State is one of those teams where people are going to be underestimating them. They went 5-7 last year, but it was a very deceptive 5-7. They showed some spurts of which they were a really good football team. It was just sort of inconsistent. And this year of improvement for them, I think they'll be a bowl team, maybe even better. BC struggled last year against FSU. They had a comeback bid against them. They went down something like 24-3 to start off the game, then came all the way back, but ended up losing in a close one. And a big reason for that was Jordan Travis. Just BC's defensive line, just sort of being unable to contain him, all those rollouts. He's a bit of a slippery QB and was able to make stuff happen with his arms too. So, I think that'll be a good game. A lot of it will depend on the progression of the BC defense if they're able to contain Jordan Travis.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I think that's going to be a really good game. A couple of home games back to back, and this is interesting. Louisville comes to town on October 1st, and I think some people tend to underestimate Louisville as well. This is a team that you kind of, 50-50 or whatever, but this is a team to keep an eye on too. So, but they come to you and they're going to be at Chestnut Hill, which is advantage Boston College.
Definitely. Yeah. And if you think BC is going to have a trouble containing Jordan Travis, they're going to have even more trouble containing Malik Cunningham. So I think that is shaping up probably to be the shootout of the year for Boston College. But I do have faith in BC's offense with all the weapons they have and Jerkovic slinging it behind center, that I think they'll be able to keep up with Louisville because their defense is stronger than Louisville's defense in that regard. So I think that'll be another good game. I think a constant theme you're going to see with BC's schedule is a lot of these games are toss-ups, could go either way. I could see almost any team in the ACC Atlantic beating BC or BC beating them.
So the next game before the Open is also at home. It's against Clemson. Clemson basically being picked the team to beat again this year in the conference. But the conference has come a long way and has sort of evened out. And if their quarterback has some struggles like last year, the door opens.
Yeah, absolutely. Clemson is a very good team, not to be underestimated, but they are no longer the team that was consistently contending for national titles just a few years ago. Like I said earlier, Dennis Grosel at QB was just a fumbled snap away from and 10 yards from beating Clemson in Death Valley last year. And I think with Jurkovec behind the helm and all the turnover that's going on with their coordinators in Clemson, I think that could be a really good game. And added on to that fact, it's the red bandana game for BC. Clemson coming to town. That's our special night, and I think the crowd will be hyped up for that, especially if it's a night game and anything can happen.
Wild time.
Yeah, a lot of emotion for that game for sure. After Clemson, you do have the bye week. Then October 22nd on the road against Wake Forest. Now, we don't know whether or not Sam Hartman will be available to play by that time. We're just kind of in a waiting game for that one, but they still have a really good offense and a lot of skilled players. So it'll be a tough matchup no matter what.
Definitely. Wake Forest was the worst loss for BC last season. They just couldn't get anything going on offense. A lot had to do with Jurkovec being rushed back from injury and not being his full self. But even then, he probably should have played a little bit better. And then Wake just tore apart BC's defense. So if they have Sam Hartman back at full strength, I probably see Wake Forest winning that game. But if not, if they have Sam Hartman back not at full strength or they have another QB playing, I could see it going either way. So I think that's the game with the most uncertainty at this point.
This next two game stretch would be far more intriguing if this were basketball, but unfortunately this is not. So let's open the game after Wake Forest. You're on the road to take on Uconn.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, not much needs to be said. This should be an easy BC dub.
I think he said it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not much needs to be said. Exactly. And following that, November 4th on a Friday night, hosting Duke.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Duke's an interesting team this year. They've got their new head coach, Mike Elko. He could do some interesting things there, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But that's a game BC should win. They beat teams of that caliber in the past with Phil Jurkovec, especially in 2020. And if they're not winning against Duke, there are larger problems for the BC team. They may be looking at 6-6 or worse.
After that, gets a lot tougher on the road in Raleigh against NC State, a team some people think could be a dark horse to not only win the Atlantic and the ACC, but even make the college football playoff with all the experience they have back this year. So this will be a tough game.
Definitely. NC State personally is actually my pick to win the ACC. I think they're the toughest game on BC's schedule, especially because it's late in the season. It's at NC State. They're going to be pushing potentially for that playoff berth, like you said, or at least to win the Atlantic. So they're going to be taking that game very seriously, and so will BC. But NC State's just the more talented team, and I think that made one of the longest odds for BC to win there.
After that, on the road to take on Notre Dame, a great rivalry between these two over the years. Obviously, we all remember the Doug Flutie Hail Mary. This year it's a little bit different. We have Marcus Freeman for Notre Dame and as the new head coach, and a lot different, but still a lot of talent there in South Bend.
Yeah, definitely. They were contending for a CFP berth sort of late in the season there last year, and they didn't lose a whole lot of production. They've got a new QB there. They lost Kyle Hamilton, their star safety, but otherwise they should still be a really good team. It's in South Bend, and like I said, towards the end of the season. So if Notre Dame is even close to fighting for a playoff berth, they're going to be fighting really hard in that game. So another really tough two stretch of games for BC right there at NC State, at Notre Dame, both November games.
And then closing the season against a team in Syracuse who, well, let's just say it, the opinions on this team are a bit all over the board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Syracuse, I wouldn't underestimate them. Like I said earlier, I could see any team in the ACC Atlantic beating BC, and Syracuse is included in that. They have a really good running game. They have an underrated defense, and in a game that's probably going to be played in at least in the cold, if not snowing or worse, November 26th in Boston. You never know what could happen there. A lot could come down to the battle in the trenches. And in that case, that's advantage Syracuse. So I wouldn't sleep on this game. It could be sort of a look past game, although you can't really look past because it's the last game of the season. So not really sure what to expect there. A lot's going to change between now and the end of the year, but I wouldn't sleep on Syracuse.
Subscribe to ACC Nation on your favorite podcast and streaming radio platform, and be sure to like and subscribe ACC Nation on YouTube. We appreciate all of you listening and subscribing. Tell your friends about us as well. Thanks to our special guest, Curtis Flannery of BC Interruption. If you're looking for the latest on the Eagles, make sure that you follow Curtis on Twitter, and be sure to subscribe to SB Nation's BCInterruption.com. Thanks, Curtis.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great. I love to talk about BC football and looking forward to the beginning of the season.